And we're doing this little garland of white flowers. And as I promised in the earlier episode, again, we're going to be looking at negative painting. I'm going to show you some more tips and tricks, and we're going to have fun creating this beautiful. This one really is easier than it looks. Okay, so let's get started. So I have, as usual, my 300 GSM watercolour paper stretched, pre-stretched and taped to the board. And this time I have included my masking tape around the edge so that I get the nice white border once we're finished. There is a little bit of sketching to do up front, but again, everything that we do in this painting is going to be done using our 3 primary colours. So let's get started. Brush wise, I'll be using my size 12 and size 6 round brush, and my rigger brush is coming back again for this. And you're also going to be needing a craft knife. I'm sure you've all got a craft knife around, and I'll show you some wonderful things we can do right at the end of the painting. Okay, let's get sketching. So very simple flower shapes again. Don't lose sleep about the sketching. If you want to, you can trace down the image. I'm starting with this central flower. If I can bring that into shot. Can I get that all into shot? So I'm going to start with this central flower and position that. And my garland's going to kind of come across here. So let's get that. I want it slightly off center actually. I'm going to bring it in here and just very lightly, I want you to use a hard pencil, a HB or a H pencil, and sketching your flowers. I'm pressing a little bit harder than I want you to, purely because of the lights in the studio do mean that you can't necessarily see what I'm doing so well. And when you're sketching, if you're going to freehand sketch this with me, then what I want you to look at is not only the shapes that you're sketching, but the negative space, the shapes that exist around the edge. So if you look at those, it kind of takes your mind off what you're trying to draw, and you're focusing more on the negative shapes than the positive ones. Just a little tip for you. So just coming nicely around, shaping our petals. And the third, fourth, fifth one, whichever number it is. I can't count today. So we have our first little flower, and then I'm going to work from that, introducing the other petals from the other flower heads. Looking at my negative space again, looking at this little shape here that we're creating, coming off the back. So we've got our flowers all at different angles in our garland. Coming up, this one's going to come just over that one. Doesn't matter if it's the same. In fact, the more varied, the better. And looking at the negative shapes as I come in to my third flower. Nice soft edges, and we're going to use our brush once we start painting down to shape these out more. Now, I'm really rubbish in the garden. I don't know about you, but the names of flowers really defeats me. This petal's gone a bit big, so I'm just going to erase that. Bring this one in first, and then I'll go back to that one because I want a gap there. There we go. So there's our nice little cluster of flowers, and then we've got something a bit softer shape coming off the side here. There's another flower, but it's further in the background. Fabulous. So that's our cluster. Then coming up, I'm going to add another little one just up here. Just a very simple shape. Not much detail going on in that one. Now I haven't left quite enough room for the fourth one, so I'm going to change the composition and bring this one over to the edge a bit more so I can fit this one in. There we go, in the top there. In fact, what I might do is move my tape down, move my tape up, so I've got a little bit more room. So I'm only going to have a thin border at the top there. That's better. That fits in nicely. So coming down the garland, following that diagonal, I'm going to come over and leave a gap. And then we've got this lovely flower head that's kind of opened up and facing us. The petals at the back, we can only just see because the flower's turned and it's kind of looking straight at us. Straight at us. You have that one there, and then just a little bud or something going on over the side. Maybe another little flower at the end there. 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to have another one a bit muted in the background like we did over here. Just a soft shape creeping in behind. There we have our flowers. We're not going to worry about the stems at this stage. We're going to bring them in at the end. So a nice loose sketch done. And we're going to paint this, remember, in the negative. But first of all, let's mix up the colours that we need. So the background's very much a deep blue, which we already have, but I want to change it a little bit, just make it slightly grayer. So we're going to need a lot of this. So I put some water in the middle of my mixing palette, my daisy palette, and come in with a big slug of the blue. You see that's very bright, and I want it a bit more muted. I want it more towards a grey. So I'm going to add a bit more in there. We'll probably have to mix some more up as we go. Squeeze that paint out of your brush on the side. And I'm going to add a little bit of my magenta into that to take it a bit purpley, making it darker. Squeeze that brush out again, waste those lovely colours. And then I'm going to bring in a touch of yellow. Just a little bit at a time, just a bit on the end of the brush. Remember, all 3 primaries will ultimately give you a grey, so that's nice. That's like, what would you call that? A dark royal blue. It's nice, but I want it a little bit greener. So just another little tiny touch of yellow, tiny bit at a time, adjusting that colour. That's more like it. There we go. Can you see the difference between those two? With the camera picking that up. So one's a lot denser, a bit more blue. This one's got a little bit more of a greeny grey. So I'm going to mix more of that up, make a big puddle of it. And we want this fairly strong, so take it quite creamy. Bring that red in. So you're making like a dark blue purple first. Squeeze that paint out. And then a couple of little tiny flecks of yellow. Test it. There we go. Same colour again. So we've got that mixed up. We're also going to be creating, there's going to be some yellows and a little bit of pink going on. The yellows I want to take a bit more ochre-y. So I'm going to mix some yellow. I've still got a bit of blue on my brush, so it's gone a little bit muddy, which is good, similar to what I want. Because in a yellow ochre, we've got a tiny bit of blue and a tiny bit of the red. I'm going to add a tiny, teeny touch of red in there. There we go. We've got our nice ochre colour. My brush still has blue in it. I'm going to change this water in a moment. I've got fresh water. So yellow, Bit of blue, and the blues come from my brush, that's enough. And then that tiny, teeny bit of red coming in to make our yellow ochre. That's better. There we go. Our ochres. And another colour that we want, just grab a bit of tissue, is a bit of burnt sienna. Now, if you have burnt sienna and you want to use it, that's absolutely fine. The same with your yellow ochre. I just thought I'd show you how you can mix it yourself. So we're going to do an orange first. Take our red. And our yellow. It's already looking a bit burnt sienna-like. Clean that off. Touch more red in there. So we've got this gorgeous colour. And then if we want it a bit more brown, a bit more burnt sienna-y, we're going to add a little fleck of blue. Tiny. If you put too much in, like I just did, we're going to get a lovely green, which is handy, but not what we want. So I need to bring the orange back. I went too heavy with the blue, but you can always pull it back. A bit more red, touch of yellow. We have our burnt sienna coming. The blue's really to take the edge off, to stop it looking bright and orange. There we go, our burnt sienna. Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to change my water. We've drawn our sketch and then we're going to get started. We're going to work wet in wet again for our background. That means we're going to pre-wet the background with clean water, and we're going to use that point of our brush again. I'm just using a little, there's a little hint of blue in my water where I've rinsed my brush out. We're just going to come around nice and slowly, using the tip of the brush to come around our flower heads. Guide, use that point of your brush to guide you round. The blue that I use, because these are handmade paints that I'm using, they are extremely strongly pigmented. There we go. I'm going to come in between the flowers. We'll go around one side and then we'll come back and go around the other side. The tip here is that we need to be working wet into wet, so we don't want this to dry on us. So I'm going to come down that horizontal. And just clean water, taking that water out to the edges of the paper. Remember, your corners will dry before the middle, but we're not putting much colour to the edge. We're going to let it fade out into a very pale colour as it comes to the edge. Let's go around these flowers at the top. So you can do this in segments, in smaller segments if you wish to. There we go. I'm just going to come up here and stop along that diagonal. It's a sensible place to stop. It's quite nice if you do have a little hint of colour in your water, because it gives you a clearer idea of whether you've gone right up to the edges of your flowers. There we go. I'm just going to move my board over a little bit out of that light. So you can see I've got a nice even coating of water, and now I'm going to go into this lovely dark bluey green that we've mixed up, and we're going to come in, popping that colour into the water around the edge of our flowers. Nice and strong. You want this colour nice and intense, which is why I'm tapping it down and letting it bleed in the water there. You can see that better. Around the edge of the flowers. This is where we want it stronger, in the middle of our garland, where there's less light, around the flowers. Just tapping that down, creating those little puddles and pockets of strong colour. There we go. And then I'm going to just use what's left on my brush as I come out, fading out as we come away from the garland, wiping off the excess paint from my brush as I move and manipulate the paint where I want those colours to be. Now we're not just going to stick with the one colour in our background, we're going to introduce some other shades, which is why we mixed our colours first. Here we go. Around that edge again. Gorgeous. That lovely colour. Okay, coming up behind this other flower. And I want the colours to change. I'm stopping where I was and I'm coming down a bit further with this stronger colour. Adding that strength next to that little white flower at the bottom, getting rid of the excess paint out of my brush, and then just using what's left in the brush to come around so I get a lighter colour, lighter variant of the same colour. More water in there. Lovely. And now I'm going to introduce a bit more colour. So I'm going to add a little bit of yellow, just a touch of my yellow straight from the edge of my pan. You can see it's already turning green, or you can't see the palette. I've zoomed in. There we go. So just coming into the yellow, picking up a little bit of yellow and introducing that around the edge. I want that quite dilute, so that's gone on a bit strong. I'm going to add some water to weaken that down and just bring a hint of green around the edge here as it mixes wet on wet into the blue that's already on the page. Touch more yellow, quite strong there, so again add some water to dilute it down. There we go. I'm also going to add a little bit of the burnt sienna we mixed up into burnt sienna, popping in, drag it through, just move it around freely, and then coming in with my fresh water again around the edge, letting it bleed out, giving it somewhere to go so I don't get a crisp hard line around the edge. Okay, let's carry on around the other side, keep going. I'm starting back to my dark, around the edge of the flowers, tapping in, creating puddles of colour, so you'll get different strengths when it dries by tapping and just letting that sit on the surface. Can you see those little puddles there? They'll give you different strengths of colour as it dries back. And around the top edge of the flowers. Now I'll just decide how strong I want that colour, how much water I've got on the brush as I go. I want a little bit of a pinky hue coming through, so I'm going to take a tiny bit of my magenta and introduce that as I come to the edge there. And then around this edge here, I'm just going to soften with a bit more water to give that paint somewhere to go, to bleed out into. There we go. So we're painting in the negative, painting around the edge of our flowers. Let's come into this middle section before I run out of colour and have to mix some more. Coming behind those leaves there. Just going up to where I added the water on that horizontal. And again, dropping in some stronger puddles in as we go round. A couple more stronger puddles down here. Just going back in and using the shape of my brush, just pushing down, creating patterns in the paint. Okay, let's go round the other side. Now it gets a bit lighter the other side. I'm going to come in with my water, just like we did on this side, round our shapes. Don't worry about those little bits in the middle of the flowers. We'll do those in a moment. And if an area of your paint is already dried, when you come up to meet it, just jiggle your brush on the paint to reactivate it. Come around the flowers with the water. Okay, I haven't got so much of the paint left now, but that's good for me because I want it lighter. So I'm using less pigment, a bit more water to allow this now to fade out. So I'm coming along that edge, along that diagonal as we go off. And then I'm going to mix up a bit more of my colour first because I've run out. So quickly go into my blue, and then I added some red, a bit more blue in there to make a dark purple. And then I'm going in with some yellow. Too much yellow and it's gone green, so I just readjust. Some blue, a bit more red. There we go. That's where I want it to be. And I'm going to dilute that with a bit more water in the puddle. In we come. Around the other side, a bit more diluted. I'm going to add some pops of other colours as I go. So a little bit of magenta coming in there. Mix it in with the blue. All wet and wet action, encouraging those colours to mix together, to blend together, giving this lovely soft colour around the top side of our garland. I'm just spreading that magenta through the blue. And I want a little bit of yellow in there too. Let's bring a bit of yellow over this side. Wow, that's a strong bit of yellow. But never fear, we're just going to water it down. Add some water and spread it in the colour around. You can even lift out with your brush. If it's really too much, just use that thirsty brush to lift out. Just creating interest in that background colour. It's not just being one flat colour. I'm coming back in to my blue. Encouraging these colours to create, have a little dance on the paper. Add a touch more yellow in this bottom corner. wet into wet now, so those colours are just blending, dancing together on the paper. I want a touch more of that magenta going on, maybe a little bit orangey, so I'm going to add some yellow and some magenta up here. So a big pop of colour there, soak some of it up if that happens. There we go, beautiful. I'm going to add a touch of my yellow in to the magenta. Moving that around with the whole blade of the brush, encouraging those colours to mix and blend. Taking it a bit more greeny there with a touch more blue. And then as I come over this side, I'm just taking clean water or cleanish water so it can bleed out onto the light side of the paper away from the garland. Okay, it's starting to dry and I want to go darker now. So I'm mixing that up again, but a bit creamier this time with my blue and red. A bit more blue. And then that touch of yellow. Go a little at a time when you're adding the yellow. Beautiful. A bit more blue to balance. Touch of red. Touch of blue. Touch more blue. It's a bit too reddy for me. There we go. Much darker now. Much creamier. Let me bring that back into shot. I'm just going to zoom the camera out so that you get to see my mixing palette as well. And my dirty tissue. Let's get that right. There we go. And I'm going to go back in whilst this is still damp and go darker around the edge of the flowers. And I want to do it whilst it's damp. We know why, so that paint will blend and flow and mix with the colour that's already down on the paper, coming in between that flower petals there on the tip of the brush. Beautiful. I don't want that dark everywhere. I'm choosing where I want that dark to exist. Now again, if you're finding that the colour underneath has started to dry back, you're just going to add a touch of water around your fresh paint. Wonderful. A touch more yellow in that mix. There we go. That's better. Coming in beneath that flower again, just looking for dark spots, adding some interest. And then it's dried a bit on me down here, so I'm going to come underneath with my fresh water, creep up on it, surprise it. And let it fade out. Be careful with the amount of water that you add. If you go in too heavy with the water, you'll get a pushback and the paint will be pushed away by that water. So just be careful how much water you add. Anywhere else where I want to add some dark, let's add a bit more dark on this top section. Just touching that in. Coming in behind that petal. And then a touch of water again, because it's dried up here, so it doesn't leave a crisp edge. Let this fade out into the water. A nice wet brush, but not soaking, so that you get that pushback. Coming off. I want a little bit more of this blue creeping in, this top edge here coming down. Just playing around with those background colours, having a bit of fun. And another area of dark coming in over this side. Let's add a bit more. Over here, just a little bit. A little goes a long way. Clean that brush, come in with fresh water. Give it that path to follow. It doesn't even matter if you go over some of your flowers. You can sort that out and fade away down to that corner with some water. Gorgeous. Okay, now normally when we're doing this kind of background, we'll then wait for it to dry before we go on to do the flowers. Oh, one last thing while we're there, I've forgotten about the bits in the middle. So let's go in between the flowers. I need to mix a little bit more up. I've used it all. Coming in to that negative space between the petals in the middle. Come right up onto the point of your brush as you come in. Fabulous. I should put my glasses on now instead of having them on the top of my head where they're no use at all. Is there any more little spaces? I think that's it. I'm just going to turn my board around so I can come in from the other angle. Oops, I just put my finger in the paint. Just tidy that up and take that a little bit darker again. Just there. Just there. Touch of water behind. Touch of yellow. Bit of yellow. Literally just playing and creating pretty colours in this background. There we go. Turn it back up the other way. Let's have a look. Okay. Now the fun begins. We're going to start creating the colours in the leaves in our background. Just tidying that up as well. Just neatening up around the edge of that petal. It looks a bit funny. Okay, and we're going to do this whilst it's wet so that we can soften these flowers away into the background. I just need to change my water. So we're going to use clean water and we're going to encourage some of this damp paint to come into the petals that are further back. So I'm just going to come into this petal over here and add some water. I really need to clean this brush properly. I'm going to get another brush. Here we go. So let me start that again because I want you to see. And we're going to take clean water into this petal that's sitting back here. I'm going to come between and I'm going to nudge into the background colour to activate it. Just oscillate that brush around so we pick up some of the colour from the background and bring it into that petal. It's like using the paint in the background as your palette, as a little pan to bring some of that colour, and at the same time it's going to soften the look. I'm going to add a little bit of magenta into there as well, just a tiny bit in to add some colour into that petal, and a little bit more of my background colour just to tint it a bit more. So we've softened it by taking that water in and upsetting the edge, and then just drop in a bit of colour in, touch more of my magenta in there, creeping in a little bit more of my purpley grey, touch of yellow in there, just to get that the shade that I'm looking for, that pushes that petal back. I'm going to come down between those leaves, okay? And then we're going to do that in another couple of places. Over here, this little leaf here, I'm going to push back. Coming in with some clean water, touching into the background, allowing some of that colour to bleed into the petal. Putting it into shadow, adding a bit of shadow there that's being cast from the petals nearby. Let's find some others we want to add some shadow to. So just up here, coming in, jigging around that edge to soften so it's not so defined. Bringing a bit of shadow in to that petal in the background. And then I'm going to come over here to this one, which is far too obvious. And again, working up, getting rid of that line. I'm going to have a difference in value, but making this little petal part of the background, slightly out of focus. Just activating that paint around the edge. So it's soft and out of focus, you see? Okay, so I've done that one, that one, that one. And now we're going to come in to some of the petals themselves and add some colour to the petals. So I'm going to keep using that background colour. I'm going to add a touch of more yellow to it to have it a bit more greeny. Just a touch of yellow, a little tiny bit more. We want these really watered down. We're going to work wet on to dry for these. I'm just going to come in from the centre of that flower, a little bit more yellow in there, a bit more greeny. Just adjusting that middle colour, the colour we use for the background, making it a bit more greeny. Very light, very watered down. We come into these petals, adding a hint of colour. Once I've put that colour where I want it, I'm coming in with my clean water again and just softening, giving that green somewhere to bleed out into, to fade away, just giving us that, leaving us with a tint of colour in those petals. Some of them I may want a bit more blue, others a bit more green. Pick up a bit of blue for this one. Stroking into the petal, coming down towards the middle, but not going into the middle. And then my clean water around the outside, feeding it, giving it somewhere to go. These flowers are still going to look white. We're adding colour to them, but they will still ultimately appear white because they're against such a dark background. And this little petal over here, I'm going to add a little bit of pink and a touch. This is such a small amount of colour that we're putting on here. And then with our clean water over the top. We're going to carry on round our flowers, deciding what colour we want. A bit more pink on this one, I think. Really watered down, lots of water on the brush. Adding that hint of colour to our petals. A little bit of pale blue, just take a tiny bit of blue. A bit more blue on this one up here. It really is just a hint of colour that I want you to add. And let's use a bit of that yellow ochre that we mixed up earlier. On this one, I'm going to add a touch of yellow ochre and put in a little bit of colour down where I want it. And then coming in with the water to dilute and let it spread around Encourage that to run into the blue. Very soft. Okay, let's bring another bit of that yellow ochre in to this one. That's still wet, so I can just add over the top a little hint of yellow ochre into those petals. Now, if you find that it's spread too far and you want to bring some light back, just take your tissue, screw it up and just tap in, and you can lift a bit of that colour back. Do remember though, before you act, that your colours will dry back lighter. Okay, let's do these little ones up here. I'm going to use some yellow ochre in this little flower and a bit of burnt sienna. Pick up a bit of burnt sienna and bring that in. Wet into wet now. You use your yellow ochre first to add the moisture to the page, and then a little bit of clean water so the two can blend and play. And this one next to it, I'm just going to pop a little bit around the middle. Touch of burnt sienna again. Just drop it in to the wet yellow ochre. Okay, I'm not keen on the shape that I've made of that flower, so I'm just going to adjust the background a little bit. So I'm just quickly mixing up a bit more of my background colour that I used earlier. I'm not quite sure what I was thinking here, but it doesn't quite look like I want it to. So I'm just going to adjust the background. Remember, when you do that, you need to soften it with a touch of water. I just didn't like that shape. Here we go. Amended. Okay, let's carry on. Come down to the flowers over here. We'll come back for the centres. Now this one is the one that's a bit different. It's facing us. So if you wanted, you could draw some lines in here to indicate that that's the petal at the back, and then you've got your stamen, which are going to come in the middle there. So my colour, my very, very pale blue, is going to be spread in these leaves here. And these petals here. I'm calling them leaves again. Touch of water to dilute it further. Stroke that through. I've left a few white gaps between those areas of blue. Fabulous. And then I'm going to use my yellow ochre to come down this side, just pulling through, adding a bit of shadow to the right hand side of my flower. Lovely. Maybe a touch of burnt sienna in there as well. Why not? Stroking that through, encouraging it to blend into that blue as we come around that flower head. Okay, I'm going to add a bit more yellow ochre to this little leaf in the background here, this petal or leaf. A little touch of yellow. Wet into wet, just moving those colours around behind that flower. Again, just adding that very out of focus, soft look. A couple more flowers to deal with. I'm going to add a bit more pink over here to this one. I think pink and a bit of burnt sienna. Create a kind of little bud there. Another one here. Same, the yellow ochre, bit of burnt sienna, touch of yellow. And then some water just to melt that together. a little soft, out of focus. Now, this edge of this little flower is quite severe because I put quite a lot of dark around it. I've decided I don't like it, so I'm just going to lift out some of that blue to make that a bit softer. So just taking a damp brush and rubbing it to reactivate the paint very gently. I just want that little bud to disappear almost into the background, and that white line around it was just too much. So you can see how you can soften that back and make it a bit more muted. There we go. So that's much softer. I'm going to do the same on this side. Soften that blue, touch down with a bit of tissue just to lift that out and make that all a bit softer, a bit more pink in there as well. Fabulous. Okay, a few more bits to do on our flowers, so just work your way round, choosing the colours you want to use. I'm going to go for that light blue again in there, and again here I want to soften that edge, so I'm just going to work my brush gently over that background to give more of a hazy look to the edge of that leaf, that petal that's in the background. Just phasing it out, fuzzing it up, making it softer. I'm going to do the same up here. Too harsh a line. If you want to get rid of those harsh lines, we just work back into that background, softening it all up, little dab of the tissue, and I've managed to melt that little bud up there into the background. I want that to disappear a bit more, almost become part of the background, so just working back over the top. Look how I'm pushing that brush backwards and forwards, just softening it up, and a little dab of the tissue. And suddenly, that's not such a bright area, it's become more of the background. Okay, so that's our base colours put into the flowers. Now we need to do a bit more work to our background to give us the look of flowers and petals that are sitting behind the main bouquet. And we're going to do that by lifting out. So I'm going to introduce you to a different brush this time. We're going to go to the flat brush in the set. You could either use the medium or the small flat brush. Let me just wet that one. Flat brushes are really good for lifting out. So are round brushes, but this will give you a bit more of a better lift. I'm going to use the small one. I'm going to activate it with some water, and we're going to come in to the background and lift out some paint to create diffused leaves hiding in the background behind. So we're reactivating the paint. Go over it a couple of times, wipe off your brush in between the strokes, wipe, lifting out little highlights to indicate petals and leaves in the dark. So a little bit of water on the brush, just jiggle it backwards and forwards. You can also use your tissue again. You want to lift more colour out, just dab down hard over the top. We're going to lift some shapes out. Clean your brush off, go again. It's very subtle. Backwards and forwards, lift out. If you don't lift out, all you're doing is allowing that paint to seep back in. Bit of a bigger lift out here, bigger shape, creating that gentle background petal or leaf. Backwards and forwards, lift out once, re-wet your brush, clean it off, and go again, backwards and forwards, and lift out with your tissue. You see you get those soft shapes in the background. Just to prove it, I'll do it with my small round brush as well. You'll get a slightly different shape when you use your round brush. So just pushing backwards and forwards there. Tissue, lift off and go again. You'll never ever get your paper back to white because it's stained from the pigments, but you can create those really soft, subtle shapes in the background. Really easy to do, very, very effective. There we go, another one. The only danger is that you can get carried away and do too many. Let's have some up here, a bit bigger. Backwards and forwards, lift off. Easier to do this when it's dry, because if your paint is still wet, what's going to happen is the paint is going to seep back in and it's going to infill behind you. So do it when your paint is dry or almost dry. Create those shadowy shapes. Really effective to do in that dark area. There we go. Couple more. Let's have some down here. Wash that brush off each time. It does depend on the paper you're using as well as the paints that you're using. Some papers allow you to lift off better than others. There we go. Some background leaves. Do I want any more? No, I think that's enough. Okay, let's go into the centre of it. So whilst we've been doing that, this is all dried off nicely. Our petals are dry, so we can go in with our small brush into the middle of our flowers and create our stamens. So I'm going to start with my cadmium yellow. Just going to come in to that centre using my small number 6 brush and just dot down, dot around that centre. Wet on to dry. Create our stamens in the middle. I'm going to do that on a few of them. There we go. Straight from the pan, don't dilute it first, just take your yellow straight from the tube so you get it nice and strong. Some up here, maybe a little bit on this one. And I've missed one, there it is. This one in the background. So dot our yellow in first, and then we're going to go over with our burnt sienna that we mixed up earlier. And we're going to dot in and amongst that yellow. Tiny dots. Now, as the burnt sienna hits the yellow, you'll get a little bit of bleeding going on, a little bit of softening as these colours blend together. If you want the colours to stay separate, just wait for your yellow to dry and then come in with your dots. I'm going to add a little bit of my magenta. Touch of magenta in there as well. Into that centre. Touch of magenta. Put a little bit of magenta into my burnt sienna and make a lovely colour. For the middle of this one back here, and then a bit of magenta over the top for a little pop colour in there, peeking through. And now for this one, the stamen is slightly different. We've got more points to them. So I'm going to use my burnt sienna, touch more yellow in there because I added some magenta to it. So just take it back to that orangey brown. There we go. Turn that round. And we're going to come in and we're going to stroke, thin strokes that come right up onto the point of your brush and pull away. This is what's going to really help give the shape to this little flower here. Just flicking Pulling your strokes in from the centre. Okay, I'm now going to use a really dark grey to add a bit more definition to the middles of those flowers. So remember, we're going to mix our blue and our magenta first to make a bluey purple. And we're going to add a tiny bit of yellow, tiny bit to that to make a grey. I want that a bit creamier, so I'm going to go again, not adding any water, just more pigment to make it dark. All three primaries mixed together. More of the blue and the red and a little bit of the yellow. Here we go. I've got this lovely dark colour which I'm going to go into the middle of these flowers with. And stroke a few darker stamens over the top of the burnt sienna of this one facing us. And you can see how that suddenly gives the flower its shape. Lovely. I'll add a bit more burnt sienna to that in a bit. And then darkening the middle of this flower. I want a little bit more red going on in this one. A bit more purple. Let me lift that up. There we go. The light was shining so you couldn't see how dark I'd taken those centres. And add a little bit more yellow as well. Such fun creating a little bit of yellow around the outer edge. Touch more of that neat yellow. This one too. Maybe a little bit dragged through our flower that's facing us. Beautiful. Okay, we're nearly there. What I'm going to do now is just have a look around my painting and decide if there's any areas I want to soften up around the edge of the flowers. So this little petal here, I want to soften. So I'm just going to work into that background just to take that sharp edge away. Just a damp brush, not too much water, just damp. Just softening that petal back a little bit. I think that's all I want to do. You could also go back round and darken your background if you want to. So you could mix up your background colour again and come in. Just like we did on the sunflower. You can go back in, add some darker colours. But just remember that if you do that, if you decide to do that, to always come back with that water behind it, not too much. Just could have done with a bit more darkening. There. Making that flower really pop forward. Okay then. Now we've mixed up our dark grey, so stick with that lovely dark grey. Really make it creamy. Okay, lots of pigment. Nice and dark. And we're going to come to our rigger brush. If you don't have a rigger brush, use the smallest brush you have. And we are going to come in to our twigs. Add our twigs. I want you to hold your brush nice and lightly in your hand. And just come down and off. Create some interesting shapes. in the background. Rigger brushes are great for this because the brushes are so fine. They even skip on the paper like they have there, which gives a wonderful effect. I'm going to have some coming out from behind these flowers, just little twigs nestled amongst our garland. Take your paint nice and cream. I'm going to have one coming out the side. Just look how they interlink, come off each other. Now, if you haven't got your rigger brush, I want you to use the smallest brush you have and hover, rest your little pinky on the paper and just use the tip of your brush. Okay, but the rigger brush is a godsend for these things. Just have fun, decide where you want them. You do need some water on your brush, otherwise it will just drag. And when it skips, sometimes that can really add something special to the painting because you get these little skips and jumps and it just looks natural. There we go. It really brings your painting to life, this last bit. I'm going to have some little twigs coming in front of this flower here. Any more? Yes, let's have one coming up the back this way. Nice and light touch, really hover that brush above the paper. Maybe one coming here. Keep your paint nice and thick and dark and have your paintbrush lubricated. So we've got our twigs, and now here and there, again, using the rigger brush is really good for creating leaf shapes. Just a little bit of yellow into that. So I'm just going to come into some of these and just push down on the end of that brush, and because it's all bendy and twisty, you'll just get tiny little leaves coming off. And you can do the same with your small brush. If you don't have the rigger, just touch down. Use the shape of your brush to imprint some tiny leaves. I'm doing a few more leaves than I did last time just to show you how easy it is. I'm going to add another branch coming down here. There we go. It's going to darken the centre of my flowers a little bit more. And if you need to, if you feel the need to, you can add a bit more colour to your petals. Once it's dry, you can come back in. There's one petal that I've seen that looks a little bit sad, so I'm just going to add a bit more colour to this chap or chapess over here. Beautiful, maybe a little bit of yellow ochre in that one. Gorgeous, really nice one to do. And the final thing, I want you to dry everything off. Dry it all. Use your hairdryer or wait for it to dry. I'm just going to darken that petal there because it's underneath. So I'm just looking for petals that are sitting underneath other ones and just add in a bit more shadow there. Okay, a really neat little trick for you to finish. So dry it off or wait for it to dry. I'm going to grab my hairdryer. Here we go. Okay, there we go. Nice and dry. Now this is where your craft knife comes in. Make sure 100% that it's fully dry. And we're going to create these tiny little highlights in the painting, okay? Almost like frost or tiny twigs catching the light. I'm going to use my knife on the blunt side and just scratch through gently and lift that top layer of the paint off. It will catch on the paper and leave these tiny little bobbly marks. You can come along some of the twigs and add some highlights there, or just have them running through. Again, works really good in the darks, on the dark side. You don't want to tear through the paper completely. You just need to get that pressure right. Drag through, scrape through, and you're just scraping off the top layer. Coming alongside the twigs is nice. It just adds that glint. Lovely finishing, oops, touch. There we go. So have fun with your craft knife, but please make sure your work is dry. I've got a little bit too much there, so I'm just going to fill that in. There we go. Isn't that a nice way to finish? So thank you so much for purchasing my watercolour lessons. I hope you've had fun and that you've learnt lots of things along the way. And I hope to be back with you soon with some more new exciting pieces to paint. Thank you again. Keep painting, have fun, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye. Thank you. Bye.